This presentation is on the DC Sniper Emergency Response and the role of public health. Now, this event was a challenge for emergency response and for public health. The DC Sniper attacks began without warning and unfolded over the course of 3 weeks. Because of the nature of the situation, which was an active manhunt coupled with continued random events, it was difficult to define roles and responses. They actually made this much more difficult on themselves because of their coordination or lack thereof, which I'll explain a little more in the presentation. The profile of this case grew to a national level as these incidents continued and suspects remained at large. This actually dominated local and news media for the 3 weeks that the event went on, as the suspects remained at large and there were seemingly no leads. So for the timeline of events, this began on the evening of October 2nd, 2002. A shot was fired through a window at a Michael's Craft store in Aspen Hill, Maryland. That same evening, James Martin was shot and killed at the parking lot of a grocery store in Wheaton, Maryland. The next day, beginning in the morning, James Buchanan was shot and killed while landscaping. Prem Kumar Wellikar was killed while pumping gas at a gas station in Aspen Hill, Maryland. Sarah Ramos was killed at a post office in Silver Spring, Maryland. Laura Ann Lewis Rivera was shot and killed at a gas station in Kensington, Maryland. And Pascal Charlotte was shot as he walked along Georgia Avenue in Washington, D.C. He actually died at a hospital an hour after the shooting. So on the first day, there were 6 murders within 24 hours. On October 7th, Iron Brown, he was shot at Benjamin Tasker Middle School. This was in Maryland's Prince George's County. So now this event has taken place over 3 jurisdictions. October 9th, that's when Harold Dean Myers was killed. This was another gas station shooting. This is in Manassas, Virginia, which is now taking it to 4 different jurisdictions. October 9th is also when they found a card by Iran Brown's middle school. It was a tarot card left by the shooters. It was a death card with this written statement that said, "I am God." So this is the first contact that they had with the suspects. On October 11th, Kenneth Bridges was killed at another gas station shooting, and this was off I-95 near Fredericksburg, Virginia. And then Linda Franklin was killed on October 14th, a single gunshot at a Home Depot in Falls Church, Virginia. So at this point, we are now at 5 different jurisdictions. Moving ahead to October 19th, Jeffrey Hopper was shot at a Ponderosa Steakhouse. This was also off I-95. This was in Ashland, Virginia, and this is 83 miles south of Washington. So the active scene has expanded greatly at this point. Ponderosa is also where they had additional contact with the shooters. They knew who this person was at this point in time. They just didn't know what they were driving, and they needed to capture them. On October 22nd, this spree continued. Conrad Johnson, who was a bus driver in Maryland, he was shot at the top steps inside of his bus. This was in Aspen Hill, Maryland, so back in Montgomery County again. Then finally, 2 days later, John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo were arrested, and this was in Fredericksburg, Maryland. So to this point, this is a multi-jurisdictional event. It's over 2 states, Maryland and Virginia, as well as the District of Columbia. There's over 20 local agencies involved right now in the incident response, and at least 10 federal agencies are providing support. The reason I'm not using specific numbers is because a lot of after-action reports have never shown specifically just how many agencies and resources were deployed. It seemed like everybody was throwing everything they possibly could at the problem, and it took a long time to get anywhere due to a lack of coordination. Now, the key players in this event, and many of you may remember this gentleman, Chief Charles Moose. He's the Montgomery County Police Chief. He's the gentleman to the furthest left. He was on TV almost every night for 3 weeks. He became the face of the incident. The picture that you see above is from the October 13th press conference, and this is on the 11th day as the incident unfolded. The other 2 gentlemen directly next to him are FBA Special Agent in Charge Gary Bald and ATF Special Agent in Charge Michael Bouchard. Both of them joined the task force the day of the 6 murders, which was October 3rd. Everything became concentrated in Montgomery County because this was where the majority of instances happened and federal resources came to bear. Other key players, once again, we have Charles Moose. Along with that is Montgomery County Police Captain and PIO Nancy Demme. Now, Nancy Demme tried to take some of the pressure from Charles Moose. She was the official PIO for Montgomery County, but no one was prepared for an incident like this. Generally, she would be fielding the majority of the media questions. That actually wound up falling to Charles Moose with support. The gentleman next to Miss Demme is Fairfax County Police Chief Thomas Manger. I list him because he headed up an additional task force in Fairfax County. He also made some comments that were, off message, talking about this as a textbook definition of terrorism. Well, by definition of terrorism, if this were to be classified as such, it would be removed from local control. Federal agencies would take over as far as all response functions, and local authorities would be relegated to a backseat role. This never did happen, but this was an example of them being off message. Now, within 24 hours, this incident grew from what could have been considered a random gun murder into a multi-jurisdictional killing spree. As mentioned before, 6 people were killed in Maryland and D.C. The majority of events happened in Montgomery County, and the FBI and ATF became part of the Emergency Operations Center, which was based in Montgomery County. The field offices that were deployed were from Baltimore. They wanted to use Maryland resources as opposed to D.C., even though D.C. is in closer proximity to Montgomery County. So within this 24 hours, they had to undertake emergency management, which was the on-scene response, as well as case management, which was the investigation of 7 different crime scenes, and incident management, because at this point in time, they still had no suspects and they had no leads. So as time went on, and this went on for 3 weeks, but in just those ensuing days, the complexity increased as numerous agencies with overlapping jurisdictions became engaged. And this was at every level. Within the DC metro area, you're going to have federal agencies that are located in both Maryland and Virginia. And there was no clear understanding of the federal role. Even though they were dedicating their resources to it, nobody understood how to use them. There was no ICS model that was fully implemented, and no defined role for public health. And this all comes to the fact that there was no unified command structure. They were not operating under NIMS. They were not operating under ICS. This led to a lot of problems. So in that response assessment, once again, I can't emphasize enough that there was no unified command structure. Had they used this, they could have utilized the FBI's critical incident response group, coordinated their resources appropriately, had everybody on message, potentially wrapped this up sooner and saved lives. They did have an opportunity to go to a unified command structure when they had to change joint operations centers very early in the investigation as things went on. There was hundreds up to thousands of actual human resources working through a joint operations center with tip lines, public safety, staging. They had to physically move buildings. At this point in time, this would have been a good opportunity for them to reorganize their command, put it into the 4 sections being led by an incident commander. There were over 1,300 on-site media members throughout the course of this event. This thing grew into a national story. Communication was mismanaged. Media was mismanaged. It didn't fall under the purview of the PIO, who would typically organize this. Media went off on their own. They started conducting their own investigation. There was a lot of miscommunication, both internally and with the public, which led to an increased panic in the public, a lot of calls for change in leadership. Chief Moose's leadership was questioned almost on a daily basis, a lot of calls for federal command and control of the incident. There were also mixed messages coming from different jurisdictions. As I mentioned, Chief Manger earlier with his, referring to it as terrorism. They had 5 different task forces who did some peripheral coordination, but they were all seemingly working independent crime scenes. At a certain point in time, they did come together under the Joint Operations Center in Montgomery County, but those were spokespeople. The actual operations were going on simultaneously, but in different jurisdictions. Unified command structure could have created a much better response to this incident. I wanted to just use a little bit about being first, being right, and being critical, which we learned in crisis communications. And there, make no mistake, this was a crisis. This was something this wasn't a one-off. It terrorized a region for 3 weeks. But beginning on October 3rd, there were reports of a white panel van. Now, this isn't even the van that's in the picture. This isn't even the one. They were talking about a white delivery truck. So if you're familiar at all with, any major city, white delivery trucks are everywhere. So there's a sudden panic among the public as every white delivery truck they see is now suspected as a weapon. They continued to reinforce this idea of white van. It became a panel van. They were stopping vans on I-95, shutting huge sections of traffic down, searching vehicles at gas stations, and they were wrong the entire time. But they continued to put this out to the public as their best information. This did not help the public perception of leadership in any way. Now, as we know, this presentation is supposed to be about the ESF-8 and the public health response to an incident. There was a part of me that regretted picking this incident because public health really didn't have a clearly defined role in this incident outside of city, county, and state mental health services. They could have had a bigger role if this were a more well-organized command structure. I think there were a lot of missed opportunities, but the primary public health function during the event was on mental health support. A lot of that was focused on area students. I say this as someone who was a substitute teacher in Montgomery County when these incidents were happening. We went on immediate code blue. Now that's a public safety alert, but what that did was keep kids not exactly quarantined, but confined to inside the building. There was no exiting or entering of campus. Only public safety officers could bring in school buses. It was a very trying time, and the code blue went on for several weeks intermittently. There was also, public safety officers worked well with mental health workers in trying to establish some security and safety within schools, dealing with kids, with their sense of panic, trying to bring the situation to as much normalcy as possible, even though you're operating under this constant threat. There was also a lot of community outreach from public health. More so could have been directed towards the homeless population or transient populations, but there was some attempt to reach them. They were targets. They had nowhere to go. Being exposed out in the open increased psychological distress on an already impacted population. They held public forums trying to talk to people about how to deal with the situation. A lot of stressed people attended these, but a lot of people looking for answers, and unfortunately, there weren't a lot of answers to be had. A lot of this outreach was also not well received in many of the poorer neighborhoods in the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area. These people were used to violent crime. There was one case where they asked, where have you been? People are shooting each other here every day. We've never seen you people before, so why are you coming around now? Some of those missed public health opportunities I was mentioned earlier, a lot of this comes down to the lack of unified command, these multiple task forces working without cohesion. There could have been more means of integrating public health and a better opportunity to share resources. So the public health expertise was underutilized. It just wasn't integrated. They didn't find where exactly the proper role was beyond mental health support. I'm not really sure how much more they could have done in this situation. It was an ongoing crime scene. But some of the things they could have done was utilizing resources, such as, critical response mechanism. Prince William County Schools actually put out brochures with some guidance on how to talk to your kids, how to deal with the community regarding the DC sniper incident. This was something that they produced while the incident was going on. Had there been better integration, this material could have been shared across jurisdictions. Prince William County Schools also had what was called a critical incident debriefing team. This model could have been used throughout all of the public schools to better integrate mental health workers, public health workers, along with public safety. And a lot of the consequences, they were documented in later studies. A lot of the peer-reviewed material in journals that I found for this talked about lasting impacts on student performance, particularly in math and reading skills, community trauma responses, lasting psychological impacts, and the impact that it did have on the homeless population. Now, with community preparedness and resilience, Montgomery County was in a particularly bad preparedness response situation. They lacked even knowledge of NIMS or ICS knowledge. They were not prepared to handle an incident of this scope or magnitude. Um, it really should have been ceded to federal authorities, but because they wanted to maintain local control and to not define it as terrorism, this everything remained maintained in Montgomery County, and they were particularly ill-equipped to handle it. It's also really like, how do you prepare for an event like this? This was unprecedented. This was a rolling crime wave that resulted in murder, and you never knew when it was going to happen, where it was going to happen, what time. They had no suspects. They had very few leads, and they didn't even know the vehicle they were searching for. So it was very difficult to prepare. As far as community preparedness, the only thing you could do is stay inside. There was a lot of resilience as far as the community because there weren't a lot of other options. People had to go to work. People had to go to school. You can't shut down the DC metro area because of this situation, even though there was this increased sense of panic and fear. There was a lot of personalization amongst people. That was learned in some after-action reports. With personalization, there's fear of an increased sense of risk, even though the risk is small. We're talking about an area of about 4.5 million people when you take into the scope of the entire area. The risk is rather small, but it was a pervasive fear. But people did persevere. They went about their daily lives, even under the psychological distress. And I would like to say something. The law enforcement really played a role in resilience. That law enforcement officers stood outside of area schools to serve as a protective barrier, a deterrent to the shooters. Just having their presence there, they hoped would deter them from attacking another school the same way they did in Prince George's County, Maryland. They set themselves out as targets. It was incredible bravery, incredible resilience that gave some reassurance to students, teachers, and parents within the communities that were affected. As far as lessons learned, they really took a good hard look at everything that went right and a lot of the stuff that went wrong. They wrote an entire book. It came out to the Justice Department and the Police Executive Forum. This is a great resource for public safety and public health workers because it's incredibly comprehensive. It focuses on command structure, communications, the deployment of resources, how you manage resources, everything across the 4 different ICS section models, how you manage communications, your PIO. It really took this as an example and broadened it and made it applicable to both public safety and public health. So I do recommend having this as part of your toolkit at some point in time. And just to reiterate some final points, one of the biggest things I got out of this was that you really do need to have that ICS structure in an atypical event such as this in order to be able to incorporate all the assets appropriately, particularly in public health. So thank you for your time. Hope you got something out of this.